episode 95. You can visit our website at John's Station to indulge in all of our past episodes. After we finish the episode, what do? We put it right up onto the website so you can see all our past episodes there. And as we mentioned last week, we are now on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. How do you like that?
Love it. Fantastic.
Yeah, no.
I need to run some data around that and see how well we're performing.
Yeah, TikTok is the most interesting of all the platforms because I noticed that one episode will get maybe thousands of views, and then the next one, which is a similar topic, similar guest, will get one. It doesn't make any sense to me. Anyway, please subscribe to see us on any of those platforms. Just type in Shanghai John into the search bar. Today, we are going to talk about something that's really interesting to me. We're going to talk about what some would argue is the greatest infrastructure disruption to occur in our lifetime, and that is the China railway miracle. You know, China just didn't create an infrastructure to connect cities. It used a $1 trillion railway infrastructure complex to manufacture urbanization itself. China is now setting the standard for smart governance and has transformed the country in so many ways. You know, it's just amazing, Ali, when I just first got to China in 2005 to compare when I was there and seeing this happen right before our eyes. It was just unbelievable. Now living in the U.S., it's just such a stark comparison to how we live here. It's just incredible. I know you live in Spain, so it's a little bit different, but certainly it's amazing to see it when we live there. Over 80% of the new high-speed railway stations in China are located in new zones specifically designed to pull populations away from the overcrowded urban centers and stimulate real estate development in those previous rural areas. Railways in China have become an urbanization machine, but how has it impacted Chinese society? And more importantly, is it exportable? Can we export this model? With some of the most innovative products in the industry, why are some countries resisting? Can you buy a train system and still avoid the political pull under the One Belt, One Road initiative? To talk about this, we are honored to have David Feng. He's a multilinguist Swiss railway visionary who has shaped China's railway landscape since 2008 by blending Swiss precision with Chinese scale. A language expert and permanent resident of China, he has traveled 1.5 million kilometers to 2,300 stations, successfully campaigning for standardized English in the nation's railway system and metro systems. His strategic insights are frequently sought by global media like the BBC, CNN, and the New York Times, serving as a vital bridge for understanding rail as a foundation for global connectivity. David, welcome to Shanghai John.
Thank you, everyone. It's just amazing, this whole infrastructure, metro, high-speed rail system in China. It's just totally amazing. You have to be there to really get the idea.
It's just incredible. I guess we want to start off the first question by asking you, how did you get into this passion for railway systems and infrastructure? What led you to where you are now in terms of your expertise in railway system?
I think the best start gets off when you're young. I still have a digitized picture of me. I don't know, was it age 4 or 5? Just before I left Beijing at age 6. It was me on the old Beijing subway. You know, back then we had like a lollipop. We had line 1, the loop line. That was pretty much it. The world famous Beijing lollipop. But Switzerland really got me started because their trains are definitely a fantastic replacement for cars. So although car ownership in Switzerland is certainly high up there, the incentive is dump your car and go for the bus, the tram, and the national railway trains. And suburban rail as well, in particular like around Zurich, where we were based in. We had a fantastic suburban railway network, almost like a metro. The funny thing is in Switzerland, they asked voters, do you want a metro? And they said no, but they developed suburban rail incredibly well. So that got my rail beginning started. When I came back to Beijing in 2000, you know, back then, like we had the lollipop network, which was like minuscule. Getting across town, I had to rely on cars. I got my own car. It was me just simply shifting between first, second, neutral, and reverse gears on Guomao Bridge that really got me thinking, do you know what? There's a faster way to get from A to B across Beijing.
Definitely.
That was pretty much. In 2007, they opened up Subway Line 5, first genuine north-south routing, and that changed the way. And I started thinking, well, let's start doing things around the subway.
No, it's great. So interesting. So I think what's interesting to me is the sociological impact of the high-speed railway in China. I thought we'd ask, now that the high-speed railway has just really impacted society, And now they're talking about having a 600-kilometer-per-hour maglev train that's going to be, I believe, is in production, and they're going to launch it this year. I'm not too sure. Maybe you know about that, which is just incredible. But at the same time, it's essentially eliminating geographic and social boundaries. If you think about it, even if we take, for example, Shanghai and its neighboring cities, I mean, it literally takes just a few minutes to get from one place to the other. I mean, do you think that Chinese cities will retain their identity, or is it just going to be a substitute for a mega super hub with all these mini suburbs where people can literally come in and come out of the cities? Where do you see the future of this, and how will this impact, Chinese urbanization?
I mean, integration is going to happen, but you mentioned I've been to over 2,300 stations. That's a bit more like, what I used to be in, because I do rail videos. But if you account for rail, metro, and tram stations, I've done probably beyond 2,300, not just in China, but globally. What I've observed is Chinese cities, incredibly enough, they keep their identity no matter where. You can go across North China to Southern China, and every city would have its own identity. One way or the other, you can tell that you are in this or that, the other city. So the local identities are still very much visible, even with many high-speed routes coming across. You mentioned Eastern China. There's now actually a subway or a metro line connecting Shanghai to Jiangsu, and at Huaqiao Interchange you can go on to Suzhou Line 11. What I've noted is that, the metro is the most integrated, the most local way to go from A to B. And even then, this was about a summer or like 2 summers ago, you could see clearly that Kunshan was Kunshan and Shanghai was Shanghai. So every city pretty much still is able to preserve its own individual identity, whether you go there by metro or by national rail high speed.
I noticed a report recently that there's severe real estate challenges in China now, a lot of empty office space. And I even think that China is now entering the gig economy. It used to be this place where we've talked previously on episodes about the workplace being the center of culture, and China will never go to a remote hybrid working environment. It seems that it's going that direction now. Office space in a lot of cities, even in growing cities like Shenzhen, there's a lot of empty office spaces. It seems that more people in China are working from home, and that, obviously was increased since COVID. How is work habits impacted by the China's railway industry? Have people now, because of the amazing infrastructure system, you're saying that the cities haven't changed, but maybe how people's habits have changed because they no longer need to they're much more connected, and therefore they can stay in their home for longer periods of time. They don't need to go into the offices. How's the gig economy impacting the infrastructure changes and planning and things?
Well, the thing is, I've been remote working since 2007, basically. So I've basically experienced this, firsthand. The human factor is still very much there. People will still travel from A to B, not just to give a talk, but also to talk to their business partners, like in a different province or in a different city. So the people-to-people factor is still very much there. The so-called third place, it could be Starbucks, it could be Luckin. People are like tapping away on their laptops, but especially on board trains, you're seeing an incredible number of people actually tapping away on high-speed rail, in particular, say, between Beijing and Shanghai, Nanjing and Shanghai. So you get people tapping away, obviously me included. And it feels like it's good. You get work done, and you get from A to B at 350 k's an hour, and it makes a lot of sense. But having said that, office space is changing. A fixed presence in offices is changing. I think it's with a generation change. Because the older generation, where the state's units took care of everything virtually from cradle to grave, has changed. It changes along with high speed, because now high speed, it connects you across the regions in such a way that the workflow has totally changed, whereas previously it took a lot longer to get projects sorted. Now, both offline with high speed and also online with, say, Zoom or something like that, it's a generation change, it's an infrastructure change, and I think this kind of change is likely to be permanent but not full, because, like I said, there will still be a human factor with all of this. There's going to people are still going to be people are going to be traveling, and I think that person-to-person contact is still very important.
I think the other thing that we noticed when we lived in China was not just the growth of railway systems, but also airport and airlines, and we saw these massive airports. I remember even flying to places where they just had this huge airport they built in the sense of accommodating for the future. There was very, very few planes, but this massive infrastructure system that they created, like the biggest airports I ever seen. And these were in second and third tier cities. I've read recently that short haul flights in China have dropped from 6 to 15%. Over the last 20 years, China spent a fortune on airport infrastructure. Where do you think the airline industry is going to end up now that trains effectively have reduced or eliminated the need for short haul flights?
Personally speaking, of course, it's got something to do with me as a pro-rails person. I'm not too sure about the future with regards to domestic flying if the high-speed network is already continuing to develop. I think in the end, high-speed will become a very viable alternative to flying. And you mentioned a maglev. The maglev will exist because some people would prefer to go by maglev between Beijing and Shanghai, or even Beijing and Hong Kong, and that's simply going to happen. I think what the airlines can do is reposition themselves in terms of like international gateways. Because if you take a look at, say, destinations offered by flight companies outside of like Asia, it's Beijing, Shanghai, maybe Guangzhou and Shenzhen, and that's pretty much going to be it. I'm thinking about other places like, say, Chengdu, Chongqing, Zhengzhou, Xi'an. These places should probably get a more proactive in creating international air hubs so that people can actually come in there and fly in, basically from a different, not just country, but different continent. So the airline industry, I would personally think, need to reposition themselves so that they're getting people into China and let the railways basically bring people across China. Of course, keep quite a number of domestic flights, but make it the ones that make financial sense, like, say, Harbin to Haikou. That's going to work because right now it takes forever to get there by classic rail. Like, even between Beijing and Shanghai, I can see in future rail picking up even more share, and they're just being left with a little bit. They're not going to stop flying Beijing and Shanghai, but the default option is to go by rail.
Yeah. I think that's actually quite interesting. One of the things that I noticed as well, and this is during COVID, I was one of the few that managed to exit China just briefly. And I remember flying back into Xi'an on Pakistan International Airlines. And obviously there was the flight options to go onwards from Xi'an to either Beijing or Shanghai. That route continues to exist today. So Pakistan International continues to fly from Beijing to Xi'an. Obviously they have a flight that goes into Beijing. But I think to your point, I think it just opens up avenues for low-cost carriers to land into cities that are around urban centers, and it just makes China a lot more accessible to many more people. And I think that urban setup, or rather that rail setup, is benefiting both business, but it's also benefiting a different type of traveler from outside of China. And it's giving access to a lot more China versus just the Beijing, Shanghai, and, not so much Guangzhou and Shenzhen, but, the rest of China, the west of China. Do you agree?
That's being the case because there's another part too, is that it's expensive for international carriers to fly into those major cities because in that sense, there's so much competition. So to fly in a secondary hub like Chengdu or Xi'an,
Tianjin.
it can be a lot
Tianjin,
cheaper.
definitely, yes.
Yeah, so those options are available to them, and those local governments obviously are encouraging airlines. I used to work on the United Airlines account, and they said that the Xi'an government was really promoting their airport because obviously they not just for visit factories in Shanxi, but also to do the tourist stuff as well, and they could fly directly into Xi'an.
I know there's also a lot like just people that I know within Europe. When we talk about travel to China, it's not Beijing and Shanghai anymore. It's Chengdu, it's Yunnan, it's other parts of China. So that's always very, very exciting. What about like domestic travel and things like this as well? I think you kind of touched on it earlier. We've seen some of the I think tourism stats in China. It seems like domestic travel is on the rise. People are choosing to go to tourist hubs and destinations within China. And I guess rail has a lot to contribute to that as well.
It's if you take a look at Jiuzhaigou in southwestern China, they've built like a new railway line. If you take a look at Shangri-La, the place, not merely the hotel, there's a Shangri-La railway station. The domestic travel is really picking up. The railways are also adding more travel-oriented, as in tourism-oriented trains. So it may not be the newest, sleekest high-speed train, but it's got like nice onboard accommodation. To go off at a tangent, the railways are also taking a good look at the, entertainment industry and adding more trains for like people going to concerts and stuff like that. So I think domestically the rails continue to do well. And they're diversifying how they carry people. I mean, think of it, before 2013, the Chinese railways were a central government department or ministry. And so every time you bought a railway ticket, you were basically being transported by a central government department or ministry. Since 2013, there's been a major restructuring, and now the railways have really taken the incentive and saying, right, let's make our services make more sense to the average paying passenger or the member of the public, really.
I'm just one question I always had was that obviously the government has spent literally $1 trillion to build this infrastructure, but they're sitting on a huge mountain of debt. 2024 is over 800 billion. They've said that really only the big trunk lines like Beijing, Shanghai are making money. As mentioned in the intro, the railway system has helped spur growth in a lot of rural areas. It's moved people from populations outside of the city. Like look at like Nanjing, for example. The hub there is a definite example of that. But I mean, this has also come along with huge real estate debt for local governments. I mean, given the infrastructure investments and the debt and real estate, is this growth sustainable? Do you think that they can continue to invest in it, given the fact that there's so much debt, both on the local side and then in the central side, because the infrastructure costs are exceedingly expensive?
No, I think the maglev, you're looking at a time frame, it's not going to come out like this or next year. This or next year, we're going to have the 400 kilometer per hour high-speed train, optimized for running between Chengdu and Chongqing on a new middle routing, which has a super straight, part of the railway line optimized for the full 400. I'm thinking with regards to rail profitability, the railways are making more money. They give out these stats and that's what they claim. But I think in particular, the question is then how do they fit into the profit-making, ecosystem? And I think one of the ways the rails could make certainly a lot more is when domestic transport transitions mostly to rail instead of just air. And we're already seeing that happen on journeys like within around 1,000 kilometers or so. I'm looking at longer distance one going into the future. The other thing is with regards to the railways and the developments in future, if the railways could make more sense as family travel, because in Switzerland, almost put this at a tangent, in Switzerland, there is actually a second-class carriage with a specific place for kids to play. Now, maybe kids in themselves, because they have reduced fare tickets, they won't make a lot of money. But when a family thinks that to go by rail is actually a cool green way of doing so, that could be something. The other thing could be to do more shops and higher quality shops. Now, there are places where they seem to go overboard with regards to in-station shops like Beijing South in the mid-2010s. There were like shops everywhere. And most of them, I'm not sure if they turned up a profit. But if you make stations become rail cities like we have in Switzerland, where there is also a fair bit of revenue either ways, then that could be something like in Switzerland. But this is also due to legislation then. You go to a railway station over the weekend to shop and it makes sense. And maybe if you had a journey towards it, that could be another source of revenue when you think about it. So I think in China now the focus is on higher quality development instead of just development at full speed. So when you focus on higher quality and think, how can we make a bit more money? Then I guess that's going to be something that could potentially land you with a fair bit more.
I remember, Bryce, you'll remember this as well. Remember when WPP opened their offices at Hanzhonglu? One of the big concern that most people had was that they were going to get robbed.
Yes.
So contrary to what David, you've said, WPP, obviously big advertising holding company. Like there was a lot of concern about the type of people that hung out at railway stations. Obviously,
yes, I believe there were highly
right?
racist type of comments that said that they were going to get robbed by Uyghur bandits. I remember that as being an issue that they were going to face.
That was one of the big issues. And obviously, that part, that area is now part of Jing'an. So it's no longer Jiabei, which was like, oh no, we don't want to live in Jiabei. We don't want to work in Jiabei. It's not up to spec. Socially, it's just not acceptable to be working in Jiabei. Obviously, all of that's changed. And to your point, it seems quite interesting that, on the retail front, I think we talked about Pudong International Airport. I think they could do with a bit more retail. And I think some of the retail experiences at train stations. I like the idea of going to train, like, the train station being a hub where it's got stuff for the family, it's got access to maybe a park, maybe there's a Disneyland in close proximity. You can do experiences with families. So there's a lot of that maybe needs to change. Do you see that happening in China as well? Is there
I
an
think the
example?
railway. Sorry, no, I think the railways are actually aware that they need to change, and they need to change from merely just transporting passengers and freight to making it a genuine experience. Now, like across East Asia, we of course have the typical example, the poster child, and that's Hong Kong's MTR, which makes a lot of money. But of course, it's got to do with the MTR doing real estate as well. Basically, in places like say Beijing and Shanghai, you do have like people which will obviously who will spend a fair bit more. The thing is, what about the rest of the country? The priorities for the railways, as I see in terms of development, is to ensure that central and western China too get access to high-speed rail. This was a no-no back about 10 to 15 years ago, but today it's increasingly a priority. And the other thing, too, I think, with regards to the railways, is relief lines, because there are now so many trains on the Beijing to Shanghai high speed railway line that compete for access because like so many people want to go from A to B. So they're building relief lines as local intercity sprinter lines. Some of them are just as fast at 350, but to take local trains off the Grande Ligne, as we say, and to move it on to more local lines so that high-speed trains can mostly use the main line from, say, Beijing to Shanghai. That's another part that I see increasingly. But there's also a semi pro bono part in the sense that the railways still continue to operate those old green trains for the local communities, and they do that because it doesn't make so much financial sense, but it's something that the local population wants, and the railways will probably say, "Let's do that," because that's the right thing to do. So, of course, it is about turning a profit the way I would see, but the railways are doing it their way. They know they need to, like any company, they want to make money, but they're increasingly looking at ways that they can do this in a better way.
Hey, I have a question. Is there still a lot of interest in getting Beijing or Shanghai hukou?
Shanghai Hukou is pretty much available to like on easier terms than say Beijing. So and when you take a look at the Hukou thing, now people have residence permits. So the Hukou attraction is still there, but not so felt as before. In our family, of course, we have people with Beijing Hukou, and that is obviously quite special for China, but it used to be supremely valuable even half a decade back. Today, it's nice to have. It's something you won't want to get rid of. But there are other cities like say Shenzhen and Guangzhou with much more open policies, and the tendency now is keep these people inside China rather than let Of course, everyone can choose a different country, obviously, but to keep
They're
them
not going
inside
to the
China.
US, that's for sure. Yeah.
Singapore,
Some some
Switzerland?
EU, some EU countries are in a bit of trouble. Switzerland's comparatively okay, but yeah, I think now the tendency is for people from outside the country to head into China increasingly.
I think that's an interesting correlation that you're building here, Ali, is that if it only takes you 20 minutes to get into the city from surrounding Beijing, what's the point of getting the hukou? The reason to move to the city is the job, but you want to be close to the job, you want the hukou. But in the reality is that you don't need it because infrastructure is improved to the point where literally taking a train from the outside of and around Hebei is literally the same as taking a subway stop. Is that where you're going with that?
That's right. That's absolutely right. And all the facilities, health, education, entertainment, are now available to not to the 20 million people that live or used to live in the urban city, but to the masses that live around the periphery. And I remember a time when it was everyone wanted to live in those high-rise towers, and now it's everyone's trying to go back to living in two-story house, something that's a bit more economic, but slightly further out of the city and enjoy the open spaces as well.
David, are you seeing that? Is there a correlation between the infrastructure and the desire for hukou or the lack thereof? I mean, is there any relationship that you're seeing?
Let me answer it this way. Literally, this is what's happening across Beijing. The new Beijing subway line 22, or the Pinghu line, is a subway line that goes for 5 stops inside of Hebei. A bit of Hebei is super close to Beijing city limits, and that's going to be big for people in that part of Hebei who, for a very long time, had to contend with long buses because there's a capital checkpoint or limited railway services on national rail. You see people across from Hebei to Beijing, the commuter lines are super long in the early mornings. So I think with the development of rail, what we're seeing is not just megacities, but regions of these megacities, like say northern China, Beijing, Tianjin, and Hebei. Southern China would be like Guangzhou and of course nearby Shenzhen, maybe across Hong Kong, Macau. Eastern China would be Shanghai, Nanjing, Hangzhou. Eastern China in particular, like I said, the interprovincial metro between Shanghai and Jiangsu, that's your typical example. Beijing is going to get its version of Line 22 probably opening this year if everything works out fine. So we'll see how things work, this side of China as well, going later into this year.
I guess that my next question would be regarding the exporting of the China railway system. I mean, there's no question that countries would hugely benefit from China's expertise and experiences. This is really infrastructure building is foundational to the One Belt, One Road initiative. I know that you've been on the train to Laos, I think, which I'd love to hear about. But I mean, some countries have accepted it, others are resistant. Can you separate buying a train system from exporting this technological ecosystem? I know even with Taiwan, they were competing against the Siemens versus Shinkansen. And at that time, they almost literally had all the plans to build the Siemens train system. And then Li Denghui at the last minute pulled out and went with Japan, and they had to redo everything at the cost of like tens of millions of dollars to refit the whole system again. How is the technological ecosystem connected with the country, or can you separate the two? And why are some countries, let's say, welcoming but others resistant?
When it comes to railway trains, I think CRRC is making lots of these, and the trains themselves can obviously go on to the individual networks in these different countries. So buying a train on its own is something, but it's not just China doing it. China's upgrading, I think, is it the Boston T? Along the same vein, Switzerland is upgrading Glasgow's subway in Scotland. So it happens. Now you're talking about like an integrated system. I've done China to Laos. The funny thing is, it is done in such a Chinese way that apart from the trilingual signage, you sometimes struggle to find that you're actually in Laos. And it's like, well, this is something we've seen north of a border. So, yeah, so I haven't actually been on the high-speed rail line built by China in Indonesia. So I'll have to take a look at that to see how it is integrated locally. Because in Indonesia, I think they've got connections to local transport, rail transport, and I'll see basically how it works. Is it just simply the Chinese system being its own and a bit disconnected from the local transport, or is it the two working together? In an ideal system, they should be working together. And the Chinese railway system should be localizing as much as it does make sense. So that at the end of the day, I think a good project benefits the ridership. That's basically what things should be at the end of the day, I guess.
There's obviously some sort of connection or feeling that you get. I don't remember what's the subway line in Beijing that is basically managed or it was developed by the MTR in Hong Kong. It's literally like you're on the MTR, but everything's in it. 就是讲普通话. I also think, just to my previous example, the Taiwan Jieyun is literally like you're on the Shinkansen. I mean, everything you would think, except they're speaking, well, in Taiwan, the announcements come in like 5 languages. But you really think you're in Japan. I mean, it's just literally that there's something that's naturally exportable or something that comes in with the infrastructure that you just can't separate.
I've been on the Kaohsiung Metro, and there they have 4 languages, and some of these are just simply like, wow, first time ever. You talk about the MTR. The MTR actually, it's not just Beijing actually, but I think also Hangzhou and Shenzhen, the MTR does lines. The one in Beijing, especially line 4,
Line 4,
It's
right?
kind of like being Beijingified, because now they also have those really not the announcements done by, say, Cherry Chan, who's the voice behind the MTR announcements, but also you get those with people basically reading into like a loudspeaker. It's basically the kind of announcements you associate with the DTA, like the Beijing Subway Company, and so they really localized that part as well. I think in terms of the announcements too, they've also made it so that it actually works a lot more the Beijing way. The MTR is also doing, transport solutions for countries outside of China. I want to go to the one they've done in Sydney, Australia, and I think that's going to be quite an interesting one to take a look at. But I think a successful system should also, like I said, with the railway trains, integrates themselves into the city. This is what the MTR seems to have been doing more and more in Beijing. And they've got extra lines. They've got the Daxing line, they've got line 16, line 17. I think they also have line 14 and a couple of new lines coming. So I think for the MTR, they have a few new projects. And the feeling that it's a bit more like Hong Kong or not like Hong Kong is less of a thing these days because everything is like so interconnected and integrated, actually.
UAE?
I would love to go there.
Yeah. Yeah, you won't like I don't think you'll like the rail system over there. It's not.
I would like to travel with an open mind, and I've been to both Canada and the United States and traveled on trains locally and internationally. Last summer, I actually traveled on the Amtrak Cascade service from Seattle King Street to Vancouver Pacific Central. And I've also done the New York subway, the Montreal Metro, the Vancouver Sky Train. They are very much, everything is different with them. I mean, I did kind of brave the New York subway. It was okay as long as you were aware where you were and paid the fare. Then it's just made common sense, really.
You mentioned that everyone's in the game. You got the Germans, the Chinese, to a certain extent, the Japanese, the Swiss. Everyone's in the railway industries. Do each country have its specific advantages? Certainly. And then what's China's big advantage?
I think when it comes to the infrastructure, I think China's pretty much in a league of its own, because the high-speed network extends from way up in like central Heilongjiang, so that's the really super cold part of northeastern China, all the way down to Hainan, which is like a tropical island. And you get mountains like in the central western part. Like I said, the railway line to Shangri-La, to Jiuzhaigou, that goes through some super like mountainous terrain. You get the part going from Gansu to Xinjiang, which has to deal with sand dunes or like heavy winds. They have to brave that as well. Sometimes very, very iffy terrain. You have those parts that go through the Qingling mountain range in central China. That was a real, engineering marvel for both classic and high speed. So I think the quasi all-terrain Chinese railway network itself makes it a serious contender when it comes to picking up projects from outside China, because they've really built the railway line in their own country like this. So they have a good idea of like what it could be like in a rather complex overseas situation. That's how I see things here.
That's interesting. So you're saying that because of the different terrain challenges that China's had, they're much more accommodating to those kind of issues that other countries face in terms of trying to build the train system within their ecosystem. That makes a lot of sense.
They were able to like pull off projects like China's Laos, probably also because Laos is a very, very mountainous, landlocked country. Probably because of the fact that China really has had the experience. They were able to, pull it off in Laos like that. And I think it's not just the only, example.
We talked a little bit about airlines. What about EV cars? We know that China is very much on this path of automobile dominance in the world. There was just a recent article in the Wall Street Journal about a guy who test drove a Xiaomi car, and he said it's the best car in the world. There's no question that Chinese automakers are making the best EVs in the world. In one sense, it's contradictory to the railway developments that are happening. Or do you see that there's a complementary thing here, or they're conflicting? How is this desire for more efficient personal transport, impacting the greater need for people to accept a infrastructure that's shared by everyone?
Personally speaking, from my own personal, perspective in Switzerland. Switzerland showing us it doesn't have to be like an and/or case. You don't have to choose in Switzerland. There is a well-developed public transport network where you can get like annual subscription, or not a subscription, but like an annual pass for the railways with the capability of using the same pass for car sharing. So the thing is, in Switzerland, it's all well developed. So there's park, and rides, and there's that car sharing mode. So basically, you drive your car to or from the station, leave there, lock it up, and then make your onward rail connection. So Switzerland's shown that it doesn't have to be either or. The two can well integrate. And I think, in terms of EV in China, EV, of course, is like virtually no pollution. So that makes a lot of like eco-sense green, eco-green sense. But I did mention park and ride. That's one thing that's well established in the West, which China can do more of to its benefit. And I think once park and ride becomes more established across China, it already is in some parts of the region, then I think the railways and the EV companies can potentially all stand to benefit, really, when it comes to think of it.
The railway system has changed, I would argue, has changed the perception of car ownership. It's not a transportation point A to point B type of thing, because that's being served better by a railway system or subway internal metro system. That cars now are lifestyle choices, that it's something that you take the family out on the weekends and go out into the mountains or do something with the family. That's where cars kind of come in. And it's no wonder that automobile companies in China are embracing camping and other lifestyle choices, because that's how people are using their cars. They're sitting in parking garages most of the weekdays because people aren't using them. And then the weekends, they'll go out, and at least they think they'll go out. They're probably, at the end of the day, they probably sit at home and don't go anywhere, watch TV. But they aspire to do these amazing things with their car.
I know that too well from my next generation. My son is always into those EVs as well. And I think probably one of the things that he takes a good look at are the bells and whistles in new cars, like, say, onboard displays and everything like that. I'm okay with cars both ways. I mean, I'm also okay with bikes. I'm like a omni-transport person. I'm okay hiking from A to B, biking, taking the bus, taking the metro, subway, driving. It all makes sense, really. And given China's integrated transport network, it's one of those networks where things increasingly seem to connect onto one another, like in a good European system, like, say, in Switzerland.
No, it's no doubt. I've blessed now to live in a city that has decent public transport, by American standards, decent. It's still far behind most countries, but it was always a pleasure for me to be in China, to live in a city, to live in cities where I did not need a car. And as an American, that's like the greatest form of development, in my opinion, is that I can leave the car at home and take public transport. I don't have to worry about all the hassles with owning a car, the insurance and the parking and all the expenses. It's just the most wasteful consumable that's ever been created. And to not have to deal with that is just a simple pleasure.
You can also try the Netherlands, where there is a car park for bikes on the same, basically a slightly smaller scale, because bikes are far more compact. But I think, is it the city of Utrecht that they have this? And they have a bike park, not a car park, a bike park right by the central station. So if China was going to go back to its world famous 1970s, everyone's on a bike, maybe that could be something. By the way, there is a bike highway in northern Beijing. I've had the great pleasure to actually ride on that, and it's really a genuine pleasure.
So where do you think that the market's going to go from a railway system in the next 10 years, David? Are we going to start to see more instances like the Beijing to Laos Railway, where we're going to start interconnecting most of the countries within the Asian continent, that you literally can get anywhere by rail? Is that the future of it? Or there will still be countries that will have different railway systems and you'll have to hop from one place to the other? Look into your crystal ball and tell us, where do you think the future is going to be in like 5 or 10 years from railway infrastructure perspective?
I think Russia, Mongolia, and the other, USSR, countries, due to the break of gauge, that continues to be an issue. I think the Japanese model, where high speed is mostly on standard gauge, if I remember clearly, but the classic lines are still meter gauge, that could be an alternative. I've always thought that China could do international high-speed rail. This is much easier said than done, but it is doable. I mean, if China was serious about going green across the entire Asian region, that is a viable alternative to flying. China is also right now doing a railway line into Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan, and they're thinking about one going into Laos. No, well, already have the one into Laos. They're thinking about one going into Nepal. So the development of railways across eastern and probably central or southern Asia in the next few years is something to keep your eyes on. It won't be a whole slew of new projects, but there could be some pretty interesting ones going forward, so to speak.
And then my last question, David, is about your favorite railway journeys, that your top 5 or top 3 ones that you'd recommend listeners to take in their lives. The scenery, the train experience is just mind-boggling. Maybe ones that people aren't aware of. That would be really awesome to share with us. I personally would love to hear some of the favorite ones that you've had and that were just totally memorable. Do you have any ones that come to mind?
This is going to be super difficult, but I can start with one, which is from Hong Kong to Beijing, because there you go through southern China with all the megalopolises, but then there's a considerable bit of mountain in the middle. Then you go via Wuhan, Zhengzhou, and in Henan, it's all plains. And during the winter, it's still very green. Then you hit Hebei and Beijing, and there it's really, really cold. But you get to see China from south to north, and it's a really, really fascinating journey. Other ones, I would say, Beijing to Shanghai by high speed especially is always a classic. Alternatively, one of the more adventurous routes would probably be from Zhengzhou or Xi'an further northwest into northwestern China. That's always something worth a look. The line I would like to try, though, is the one to Jiuzhaigou, because they've got really, really mountainous, territory, and that's something I like to check out as well.
And are they starting to promote railway experiences in China similar to the other markets where it's just you take the train for the scenery? And that's the reason you get on the train is to not necessarily to travel, but just to look outside the window.
It's increasingly becoming so. I mean, it's still early days the way I see it, but it's increasingly becoming the case.
Hey, I have one last question. 100 years later, half the population, what's going to happen to urbanization and all this railway infrastructure that's been built? I know we talked about 5-10 years, but then one thought that came to mind is like if the population's going to halve, and we've got all these urban centers, these mega urban centers where Tianjin is part of Beijing and Jiangsu is part of Shanghai. What are we going to do with all that rail?
Well, I think what we can transition is we can use the classic railways for cargo and make all rail basically high-speed based, so that in an ideal situation, the rails would still be there. Frequencies might be adjusted a little bit, but what's already been built is not going to get torn down again, because it would be a huge waste of investment. So they would be repurposed, but they would repurpose it in an as optimized way as possible to suit the case that there's going to be less people around. And I think by then, the case is, let's focus on personal experiences as higher quality personal experiences rather than moving billions and billions around. I mean, moving people around is still going to be a core business of railways, but they're going to do it, hopefully, in a slightly more higher quality way.
That's fascinating. David, it's a total pleasure to have you on the show. As I said at the earliest, I followed you on social media. I listened to your podcast. I love your passion for trains. It's just absolutely infectious. And we're really honored to have you on the show today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, too. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
And thank you for joining us. Join us in a few weeks for another exciting show. And to all our listeners, until then, have a great day.